Dr. James had performed thousands of ultrasounds, but nothing had ever prepared him for this moment. The room was silent except for the steady hum of the machine. The screen flickered, adjusting to the movements inside the womb. At first, everything seemed normal, the familiar shape of a developing fetus, the rhythmic flutter of a tiny heartbeat. Then something changed. His hand, steady from years of experience, suddenly trembled. His breath caught in his throat. The image on the screen wasn't right. Shadows flickered across the monitor, distorting the outline of the baby. For a split second, it almost looked like a sharp chill ran down his spine. His vision blurred. His knees buckled. Darkness. When he came to, the overhead lights burned into his eyes. Murmured voices buzzed around him. A nurse was kneeling beside him, her face pale with concern. The mother, still lying on the examination table, clutched her belly, her wide eyes darting between the doctor and the machine. The ultrasound screen was still on, frozen on that last image. Dr. James swallowed hard. He wasn't sure if he wanted to look again, but he had to. Slowly, he turned his head toward the screen, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Dr. James sat in the dim light of the recovery room, his head still heavy with unanswered questions. The ghostly image of that inexplicable ultrasound replayed in his mind, an enigma that refused to be explained. Despite the chaos around him, the hushed murmurs of nurses and the anxious, wide-eyed glance of the expectant mother, he felt an overwhelming compulsion to return to the examination room. Inside the now quiet room, the ultrasound machine's display continued to glow with that haunting image, frozen in time. It was as if the device itself was holding its breath, guarding the secret it had just revealed. Dr. James's hands trembled slightly as he approached the monitor again, his professional curiosity now warring with a deep sense of foreboding. He recalled the moments before his collapse. A subtle shift in the shadows, a distortion that he couldn't quite put his finger on. The details were blurry, yet they whispered of something beyond the realm of ordinary medicine. Was it a malfunction, an optical illusion born of fatigue? Or was it something truly otherworldly, defying the laws of science and nature? The pregnant woman lay quietly on the table, her expression a mixture of concern and quiet resignation. In the sterile environment of the hospital, every small sound, the beeping of machines, the soft rustle of fabric, seemed magnified, each one a reminder that something extraordinary had just occurred. Dr. James wondered if the baby, or whatever it might be, was trying to communicate a message from within the veil of mystery. Determined to uncover the truth, he began reviewing the scan from multiple angles, comparing it with countless images from his extensive career. But no technical explanation could reconcile what his eyes had witnessed. Every attempt to find a rational answer only deepened the mystery. As the night wore on, whispers of strange legends and folklore from distant cultures came to his mind. Tales of unborn souls, of miracles cloaked in enigma, and of fates intertwined in inexplicable ways. With a heavy heart and an insatiable need for answers, Dr. James resolved to delve deeper into this case, even if it meant venturing into realms where medicine and myth converged. The story was far from over. In the quiet solitude of that hospital corridor, questions multiplied with every passing minute. What had truly been captured on that ultrasound? And what, if anything, was it trying to tell him? The answer lay somewhere between the seen and the unseen, waiting to be discovered in the next chapter of this unfolding mystery. The hospital had quieted for the night, but Dr. James felt no relief. The image on the ultrasound still lingered in his mind, shifting, elusive, taunting him with its mystery. He had seen thousands of scans before, and yet, no matter how hard he tried to rationalize what he had witnessed, the unease in his chest remained. With a deep breath, he retrieved the ultrasound data from the machine, transferring the images to his computer for a closer look. Maybe a malfunction in the equipment had caused the distortion. Maybe it was nothing. But as he zoomed in, adjusting the contrast and analyzing every shadow, his stomach twisted. It wasn't just an anomaly. There was something or someone beside the baby. A shape barely distinguishable in the grainy black and white, nestled in the darkness of the womb. It wasn't another fetus. It wasn't a twin. It had no clear form, no recognizable features, yet the more he stared, the more it felt aware. A cold sweat broke across his forehead. He ran the image through enhancement software, trying to convince himself it was an illusion. Pixels, glitches, a simple trick of light. But with each adjustment, the figure only became clearer. An elongated shadow curled near the fetus, almost cradling it. Presence. The air in his office seemed to thicken. He forced himself to stand, inhaling sharply as if shaking off an invisible weight. He needed answers. Flipping through the patient's file, he studied the woman's medical history. Nothing unusual. No complications. No prior scans indicating abnormalities. But then, something odd caught his eye. The woman had undergone multiple checkups before this, yet none of the previous ultrasounds had recorded any irregularities. So why now? His fingers hovered over his keyboard before he made a decision. He needed to talk to the patient. The woman, Sarah, was still in the hospital room, resting in the dim glow of the bedside monitor. She looked up as he entered, sensing his unease. Sir? James hesitated. I just need to ask a few questions, he said carefully. Have you experienced anything unusual during your pregnancy? Strange dreams? Feelings you can't explain? She blinked, shifting slightly. She hesitated, chewing on her lip. I don't know if it's relevant, but I've had this dream, repeatedly, ever since I found out I was pregnant. Dr. James felt his pulse quicken. What kind of dream? Sarah swallowed, her gaze flickering toward her stomach as if afraid of her own words. There's something with me, she whispered. Not a person, not a thing, just a presence. It's always there, watching, waiting. She paused, her voice dropping lower. And sometimes, I feel it when I'm awake, too. A chill ran down Dr. James's spine. Whatever was in that ultrasound image, Sarah had felt it too. And she wasn't the only one. For the first time in his life, Dr. James felt that medicine might not hold all the answers. The hospital felt colder than usual. Dr. James stood near Sarah's bed, her last words still ringing in his ears. There's something with me, watching, waiting. He had heard of pregnancy-related hallucinations, of heightened emotions causing vivid dreams, but this was different. He had seen something that shouldn't have been there, and now Sarah was confirming it without even knowing what he had found. Trying to steady his voice, he asked, Has this presence ever spoken to you? Sarah's fingers curled slightly over the thin hospital blanket. She hesitated. Not in words, she murmured, but I feel it, like it's trying to tell me something. A slow, creeping dread settled over him. He didn't know what he was dealing with, but he needed to understand it before jumping to conclusions. I want to run another scan, he said. Sarah nodded, her expression unreadable. Back in the ultrasound room, the machine powered up with a soft hum. The gel was cold against Sarah's skin as he placed the probe on her belly. The screen flickered to life. For the first few moments, everything appeared normal. The soft thump of the baby's heartbeat, the tiny hands curled near its face. Dr. James exhaled, relieved. Maybe he had imagined it. Maybe it had been a glitch. But then, a flicker. A shadow shifted at the edge of the screen, just beyond the baby. It was subtle, barely there, but unmistakable. He adjusted the probe, trying to get a clearer view. And then it happened. The shadow moved. Not in the way a trick of light would. Not like an illusion. It shifted with purpose. Dr. James's breath hitched. His grip on the probe tightened. Sarah gasped. I felt something, she whispered. And then, for the first time, the shadow looked back. The ultrasound screen distorted for a brief second, and in that moment, Dr. James saw something he would never forget. 2 hollow indentations where eyes should be. A face not fully formed, not human but present. Watching, aware. The machine let out a sharp beep. Static crackled across the screen, and then, just like that, it was gone. The image returned to normal. The baby was there, alone, sleeping peacefully. Dr. James pulled back, his hands clammy. Sarah was staring at him, her own face pale. "You saw it, didn't you?" she whispered. He couldn't lie. He gave a slow nod. Sarah exhaled shakily, her hands resting over her stomach. "Then it's real," she murmured. "It's really here." Dr. James had never believed in the supernatural. He had always trusted science, facts, but tonight science had failed him. Something was growing inside Sarah's womb. And it wasn't just a baby. Dr. James had always believed in science. The body was a system, cells and organs working in perfect harmony. The unknown could always be explained with enough research, enough tests, enough logic. But now, sitting in his dimly lit office, staring at the frozen ultrasound image on his screen, he realized there was no logical explanation for what he had seen. Sarah's words echoed in his mind. "Then it's real. It's really here." What did that mean? What was it? He had spent hours reviewing the ultrasound, running it through every enhancement tool he had access to. The shape, the presence, wasn't an imaging artifact. It wasn't a twin or an abnormality or any known medical condition. It moved with intention. It had looked at him. It was aware. And Sarah had felt it. The next morning, he returned to Sarah's room. She was sitting up, her hands gently placed over her belly, her face distant. "I need to ask again," Dr. James said, carefully choosing his words. "Before this pregnancy, have you ever experienced anything unusual?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I never thought it meant anything before," she admitted. "But I had a miscarriage last year." Dr. James blinked, surprised. There had been no record of it in her medical file. "Did you see a doctor?" "No." Her voice was quiet. "It happened early. I hadn't even told anyone I was pregnant yet. But I knew. I could feel it." She exhaled shakily. "And after that, I kept feeling something, like it never fully left." A chill ran down Dr. James's spine. "Do you think this presence," he hesitated, barely believing his own words, "is connected to that pregnancy?" Sarah looked down at her belly, a strange softness in her expression. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I think it wants to stay." Dr. James felt an overwhelming unease. If what Sarah was saying was true, was this a spirit? A lingering soul? A life that had been lost and somehow refused to be forgotten? Or was it something else entirely? For the first time in his career, he realized he was facing a question medicine couldn't answer. Not with tests, not with data. The image on the ultrasound, the presence watching from the shadows, was something beyond science. And whatever it was still with them. Still waiting. Dr. James took a deep breath, forcing himself to refocus. He had let his imagination spiral out of control, but he needed to think logically. There had to be a medical explanation. He straightened, looking at Sarah seriously. I want to run more tests. Blood work, genetic screening, a more detailed ultrasound. Just to be sure everything is okay. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Do you think something's wrong with my baby? Dr. James hesitated. I don't know yet, he admitted, but I want to make sure we understand exactly what's happening. Over the next few days, Dr. James devoted himself to Sarah's case. He consulted specialists, analyzed the ultrasound images, and ran every test he could think of. But the results only deepened the mystery. The baby's DNA was normal. No signs of genetic disorders or abnormalities. There was no evidence of a twin. No vanishing twin syndrome. No extrafetal tissue. The ultrasound machine was working perfectly. No malfunctions, no imaging errors. And yet, the presence in the ultrasound remained. Every new scan showed the same shadow, just outside the baby's form, just beyond the reach of easy explanation. Dr. James broadened his search. He looked into rare medical conditions, prenatal anomalies, even experimental studies. And then, buried in a journal article from years ago, he found something that sent a chill through him. A case study. A woman, pregnant, healthy, had experienced something eerily similar. Her ultrasounds had revealed a shadow next to the fetus, one that moved independently. Doctors had dismissed it as an imaging error. But when she gave birth, they made a shocking discovery. She had been carrying a fetus in fetu, a condition so rare that fewer than 200 cases had been documented worldwide. A twin that had never fully developed, trapped inside the surviving sibling. A life within a life. Dr. James stared at the report, his heart pounding. Could this be what was happening to Sarah's baby? The next time Sarah came in for a scan, Dr. James took his time, carefully examining every angle, every shadow. And there it was, small, indistinct, but unmistakable. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a spirit. It was tissue, a mass partially formed. Not a separate baby, but a remnant. A twin that had never fully developed, now embedded inside its sibling. Sarah watched him closely. You see something, don't you? Dr. James exhaled slowly. He had spent days fearing the worst, letting his mind wander into the impossible. But now he had an answer. I do, he said carefully, and I think I know what's happening. He turned the screen so she could see. And as Sarah's eyes widened in shock, the truth was finally revealed. Dr. James steadied himself, his medical instincts taking over. Now that he had a plausible explanation, he needed to approach this carefully. Looking at Sarah, he said in a calm, measured tone, Sarah, based on these scans, I believe your baby may have a very rare condition called fetus in fetu. Sarah frowned. What does that mean? He adjusted the screen, pointing at the shadowy presence near the baby. At some point in early development, your baby had a twin, but instead of developing separately, the twin was absorbed. What we're seeing here is likely remnants of that twin inside your baby. Sarah's face paled. Is my baby in danger? Dr. James sighed. Not necessarily. In most cases, the tissue is harmless, sometimes forming a small mass that doesn't affect the child's health. However, in rare situations, it can grow and cause complications later in life. She placed a protective hand over her belly. What do we do? We monitor closely, he assured her. Right now, your baby appears healthy. But after birth, we'll run tests to determine if any intervention is needed. Sarah nodded slowly, absorbing the information. I just want my baby to be okay. And that's exactly what we'll make sure of, Dr. James promised. Sarah's pregnancy progressed without complications. Despite the unsettling discovery, her baby continued to grow normally. Finally, the day came. After hours of labor, She gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The medical team immediately conducted tests, and as Dr. James had suspected, there was a small, undeveloped mass inside the infant's abdomen, remnants of the twin that had never formed. A few months later, after careful evaluation, surgeons removed the non-functional tissue. The baby recovered quickly, and Sarah left the hospital with her son, relieved and grateful. Dr. James watched them go, feeling a deep sense of closure. What had begun as an unexplainable mystery had turned into a lesson in the unpredictability of life. Science had given them the answers, and in the end, it had given Sarah and her child a future.